All right, folks. I'm feeling some urgency here. So I want to make a move now. We are in the fourth and final movement. The fourth and final movement is artfully intervening, skillfully intervening. So that's where I'm at. Let me just point out a few things. These are parting gifts for me because I'm told by a number of reliable people I got to jet out of here and get on a train so I can get to O'Hare. But I want to leave this with you. So Meredith has said that basically there's this book called Awareness. I just downloaded it from Anthony DeMello, which may be useful to us. This book is called Reality, Grief, and Hope by Walter Brueggemann. I'll leave this up here for you as I go. Why I recommend this is that Walter Brueggemann does this analogy between post-9/11 America and post-Babylonian exile Israel, Jerusalem, and the subtitle is The Three Urgent Tasks for the Church. And so he lays this out, and it's really the work of leadership, how to name and get truth in the room, difficult, how to name loss in a society that doesn't want to name loss. We'd rather replace the reality of loss with nostalgia. So without being partisan, Make America Great Again is a wonderful paradigmatic study because it really is, it's nostalgic rather than dealing with the loss, right? Because he's never had to define it. So he's pitch perfect in helping people, enable people's dysfunction of rather choosing nostalgia over the reality and the loss that we're all experiencing institutionally, individually, etc. And he says, until you do the loss and the grief, you'll never get to an authentic hope. The hope is in the ashes. The hope is at the cross. Once the death happens, once you acknowledge the death, then you move to hope. Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. What most of us do for a living is meet. She'll tell you how to really make meeting work and serve the purposes of leadership. Otherwise, meeting will make you serve it. So she gives us a lot of help with this. And then the path to purpose, if you need a little bit more about that, if you're animated by that idea, want to see how to weave that idea really into your institutions, a guy by the name of Will Damon writes a book called Path to Purpose. I ran out of space. I also gave that other book today, which Matt downloaded. What was it again? The Story of Purpose by Joey Reinman, formerly the CEO of Bright House, which is a Fortune 100 marketing company. And all he got Fortune 100 companies to do was go back to founding DNA, sell off distractions, and it made them all profitable. And it's the same work that we're asking churches to think about, which is, if we went down, caught the elevator down to the boiler room, what will we find out? Yeah. So Drew, I just laid out a series of resources here. Drew and I have been having an ongoing conversation about the hows, and so I trust you to these folks, especially Will Damon, Priya Parker for meetings, Brueggemann, if you really want the exegetical tools to talk about now. This is where you get that line that I use with y'all, that systems would rather default to denial, despair, or euphemism rather than deal with reality, right? All right, so that's just some resource parting gifts for you. So I'm in the fourth movement now, and so we talked about ready, shoot, aim. If we correct that, it's ready, aim, shoot, and ready, aim, shoot has to do with we're diagnosing. And did you hear the sister today? In everything she said, we diagnosed. She didn't use that word, but it had to do with we had a talk, we did this. We got a sense of what we were looking at, and then we made a move. So diagnostic, we've talked about. Self-management, how do we do that? The third movement was, okay, let's mobilize. Nothing mobilizes like purpose, right? And of course, all these other movements are here for you to read and take a look at. Now, we finally, notice what's last. Now, what is last is do. And how many people can honestly say that you're challenged by that Yeah, because most of us, it comes from good intention. We want to start off with what? Doing. We want to do before we see. Or we want to just take a glimpse and then do. Right? And so, this whole leadership sustainability thing is about going deep, understanding what you're talking about so that you can actually act. And so, one of the biggest pieces that I want to give you in the short time that I have is this idea of acting experimentally. Acting experimentally. So what I'll just give you a story maybe. So one of the things that if I've done anything that's an intangible but yet a gift to the system that I'm called to serve with is that I've used this word experiment. And it has been so life-giving to my system. Now, we experiment based on purpose, and we experiment with data. We get the data before we launch experiments. So purpose and data help us understand what experiment to run, right? What try. But what we found out was, because most of our job is talking, right? What we found out is that how do you circumvent some of the foolishness that the system wants to give you? You don't necessarily use the word change. You don't necessarily jump to the word loss. You use the word experiment. And so what we've tried to do is move our system to have a posture of experimentation. Paul was running experiments all over the then known world. You might argue that Jesus was wandering through Galilee running experiments, right, with different populations, different endeavors, etc. Dr. King came here in the 60s and ran an experiment in Chicago about trying to take all that Deep South credential and mobilize it here in Chicago. And you know what he learned? I should go back to the South. But it was an experiment that he felt like he had to run, right? And so I'm offering you that as maybe a way forward. The reason why we use experiment I alluded to earlier is that also it gives us an opportunity to talk to people in terms of experiment and learning rather than try and fail. One of the things that we find that in our systems, in our own individual lives, we're really gun shy, if we can use that language, or try shy because of the specter of failure. And so our own people will say that back to us. But if you can hold in your own life and you can sort of preach that and teach that, you can talk in terms of experiment. I have found that giving that word to the system in 8 years, I hear people now give that word back to me. And that's how you know you've really penetrated the system, right, is when they start giving you back your words. And what's really hilarious is that when they don't even know where it came from, is awfully good. Oh, Bishop, I'm just running some experiments. Great. So, that's my answer. So experiments. And so experiments are trying to make progress. Remember, we're just trying to make progress across the gap. So if you want to know, what we're doing is we got the current reality, we got some data, we got all that sort of stuff, we got our purpose. Now we're trying to make some progress across here. It's not always linear. For some of us who are obsessed with linear, it's not always linear. But the point is we're trying to make some progress towards our aspiration, who we say we are. Who we say we are. It's fascinating to me that, as Sister was talking today, they ran an experiment about changing the Lord's Prayer, didn't they? Yeah. And then there was a competing value. Do we want to do that? Does it really serve our ultimate whatever? And then they did what as a system? They backed up. So sometimes that's operative, right? And we don't feel any shame. They learned. And, you don't spring change on Big Mama. Don't mess with her Jesus. And it was not an ultimate sort of big thing, so they just backed up off of it. I thought that was fascinating, what they learned. They learned something about that 6 o'clock service, didn't they? And so one of the great gifts that we can give a culture that we serve, a system that we serve, is this lightness to be able to run an experiment. A lightness. And that's how we talk. Right? And that's how we should raise the expectation that we should be running experiments. So one of the ways I make decisions in the Diocese of Atlanta is we look at some of the stuff and we ask ourselves, do I really want to finish my tenure as bishop having not run this experiment? If that makes any sense. So why would I think that I should be a bishop of a diocese for 10 years and not run an experiment on how to grow Hispanic churches in the diocese? Especially when the data says that Hispanics are all around my diocese. So we run experiments. We've called them church plants. We've done the data. We've put people in the right places. Now I have more Hispanic congregations than Texas.
Wow. That's incredible.
In Georgia. And you know who told me that? The Bishop of Texas.
Wow.
We ran an experiment. We started a ministry school in Spanish among the congregations that we did have, trying to create a bit of a greenhouse for Hispanic people that we could sort of look at and say, oh, we could see ordination in you. We built out a Hispanic ministry school called CETLA, Christian Education to Latinos. Built it, wrote the curriculum, et cetera, and then ran that experiment. We did not know if it would work. And I was very transparent with everybody, the people who wanted to fund, the people who wanted to sort of talk about it, who wanted to sort of my standing committee, all my executive boards. I was clear to them, we do not know if this is going to work, but the data says this is an experiment we should run. So a capacity for us is to think strategically about what experiments we should be running, and also to be transparent with people, to create that lightness in the system that we ought to be running experiments. And to be honest with people that we don't know if this is going to work. I can tell you about another experiment that we ran that we learned something but did not have the intended outcome. So we asked for some money from one of our foundations. We put a chaplain in an urban setting and thought that that was going to be what we needed to do. It was the right sort of inner city neighborhood. We had had some people dithering around the edges. This was our full-time experiment to put somebody in there, see if you could get this sort of neighborhood going to church in this particular way. And you know what we learned in 3 years? It wasn't going to happen. We learned that, and we tried to refine on the way. We were transparent about it all the way, but it was an experiment I felt that we needed to run to say with integrity we were being neighborly to this community. And so we talk about that. So that's another paradigm is that if you have a real issue, you personally have a real issue about failure, maybe you need to work on that capacity. See, my self-worth is not involved in the experiments I run.
That's right.
My self-worth is not involved in the experiments I run. Right? So I could say to anybody, and I have said to other rooms, we ran this experiment. What we learned was. And so one of the great gifts you give to a culture by acting experimentally and talking about experiments is that you begin to cast out, or at least work against the demon of failure that keeps the ceiling height low. In my marriage, how we worked this paradigm is that early on in our marriage, when we lived in Manhattan, I was a serial furniture mover. I could never, I mean, I have no degree in interior design. I'm probably, but I just felt like the feng shui was just not right in the crib. You know what I'm saying? It just wasn't right in the house. So I kept moving furniture. Now, my wife is nice, but at a point we reached the end of her niceness. And so I had to develop a sentence. I said, honey, if you'll just allow me to just live, can we just live with this for a little while? And so that's really what I'm suggesting to you, is that we can ask the powers that be, we can ask ministry partners, cohorts, et cetera. This is something we got to try to live into the integrity of who we say we are, and let's see what we can learn. And that takes a real lightness. And again, what supports this idea that I'm talking about right now is all the things we've been talking about, getting cohorts, getting people around you. But let me just stress one big piece, data-driven. So I got a lot of spreadsheet people in my congregations and on my executive boards, right? What I feel like I owe those people is to show them the data that begins to justify why we take the try. And they've come to trust that I'm going to do that due diligence, so they know I'm not. So this is not, acting experimentally is not a cover for willy-nilly.
Do you apply time constraints to the experiment?
She asked a wonderful question. Do I apply time constraints? Yes and no. Yes and no. So, for instance, when we ran the Hispanic ministry thing, we didn't give ourselves 3 years or 2 years. But what we had in place was a meticulous sort of meeting schedule where we were going to constantly begin to look at the data as it emerged, right? So how many people have we moved through the system? Me and my other teammates, constant meetings with those folks about what we're learning. Is it gaining traction with the Hispanic people? Are we finding some enthusiasm, some excitement? Are those people being equipped? Yes. So we did it like that for that one. For the chaplain in that one particular scenario, yes, we gave it 3 years. Absolutely. So it just depends. It just depends. Remember, adaptive challenges are not always time-friendly things. So if you're going to run an experiment against an adaptive challenge, sometimes you have to be careful about giving yourself too tight of a timeline because you're changing values, world beliefs, and world views and deeply held beliefs. And sometimes those things don't pay attention to clocks. But I think what you owe people, Manisha, is in your regular cycle of reporting out, you owe them some report of what you think is happening, some real reliable stuff. And so we have a pretty meticulous reporting cycle in the Diocese of Atlanta. And so we kept people abreast.
Bishop,
Please.
The language of experiment is really helpful and resuscitating.
Yeah. Okay.
And I want to ask if it seems like what I'm hearing is this language of experimentation. We're really only interested in the results and kind of collating and looking, collecting the results and looking at what we have, and not necessarily trying to determine whether or not the experiment itself was a success or a failure. We really just want the learning, and if something good comes out of it, then that's an extra bonus. But we really were interested in trying to answer a specific question.
Yeah.
Am I hearing that right?
No, maybe I'm failing it. Maybe I'm failing. Let me just tell you who I am. I'm trying to get the ball in the end zone every time I hit the ball. Every time I touch the ball, I'm trying to get in the end zone. That's me. That's my own personal dysfunction, right? Okay. But what I've learned is that the language of experimentation communicates a certain lightness, because some people get really locked into try and fail. See, if I try and learn, then that's just now a pivot point now, right? That's a pivot point. So I can still go after work X. Just now I've learned that the way I was going didn't work. Now maybe I have to go 10 degrees to the left or 15 degrees to the right, or maybe I didn't have the right person, or maybe, you know. So I'm not just only interested in learning. I was interested in growing Hispanic congregations in the Diocese of Atlanta, period. And I didn't know that I did, but I want to be successful in welcoming Hispanic men and women and children to the Episcopal Church in Middle and North Georgia. I want it, clearly. I'm not vague about that. But on my way there, I realized I may not get it right the first time. And there may be refinements needed along the way. I refuse to call them failures. Because the data says that Hispanic population is a growing population. The data says that Catholics are disinviting lots of Hispanics from their congregations because they have families beyond marriage, because they have divorces, because they have all sorts of stuff. I want to be home for those people. So I'm interested in the learning, yes, but the learning is just giving me pivot points and opportunities for refinement on my way to where I want to be. Now, if I don't get there, I don't get there. But I've done my homework in the diagnostic piece that I should be able to make some increase. So I've started 4 in the last 2 years. I probably could start 4 more if I could get that pipeline from that seminary, my own homegrown seminary, to get those people ready to go. Yeah, I just ordained the first 2 homegrown Hispanic women ever in the history of the Diocese of Atlanta, 113 years.
Wow.
And I have about 5 more people in the pipeline for ordination next spring. Next spring? Next spring. So, I mean, if I want to call that a win, that's a win. We used to wait in the Episcopal Church to get Catholic retreads. So Catholic priests would fail out of the Catholic Church because they woke up one day and realized God didn't ask us to give up everything. Say amen. Or, etc. That used to be the only way, the only supply chain for clergy. I hate that. I hate being told what my supply chain must be. So we developed this other way. So I'm trying to win. And so learning is important. I don't believe in the failure piece, but there's, the learning is where should I refine my work at? So refining for us, one quick example would be, where do I plant? So now I just finished planting one in Athens, Georgia, by UGA campus. Yeah. I'm getting ready to plant another one up in Carrollton, Georgia, and Rome, Georgia, and Dalton, Georgia, where they make carpets at.
Right, a lot of that's right. All those.
So, so my refinement and my learning on the way is where. But I'm crystal clear, I'm trying to win. Yes, sir.
Can I just to piggyback on that? You use this ready, aim, fire analogies on the range. What they'll tell you is you shoot and you're not, and somebody will tell you, oh, the wind is like this today.
Yeah.
The wind.
Right.
Some other particularities, and so on your scope, you can adjust.
Yes.
You refine.
Right.
You shoot again.
To control for wind, that's right.
You have to control for that. I have this follow-up question about the use of metrics, and part of this comes from, because I don't understand a lot of it, because one of my sons is a data analyst.
Yes.
But when Nisha asked about time limits.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at data.
Yes.
To measure, obviously you're looking at things, yes, like butts and bucks, but what else?
I'm looking at census stuff. I'm looking at demographic stuff. I mean, I've got people on the ground. I'm talking to community leaders who are not necessarily part of the church who are telling me it should be in Athens first, then Dalton. I mean, people who know stuff on the ground that I don't know. So I should put it in Gainesville, right, and not in Oakwood, which means nothing to y'all, but it meant everything to us. And it was only 30 miles north.
But that actually is the difference between success and failure, because one of the things that we had a failed plant at a Spanish congregation.
Yeah.
And that's because Bishop wanted it to be in a neighborhood called Little Mexico.
Yeah.
For some reason that didn't resonate with the Hispanic population. And demographically, the Hispanic population in the Detroit area are in Oakland County, which is where Bloomfield Hills is, and other places. And the average income for a Hispanic person is $70,000.
Okay.
So they're actually a higher level. So but that was so outside of what people wanted to hear.
Presbyterians did the exact same thing.
Yes,
and we failed.
Yeah, so they keep on going to Little Mexico, and people who the median income is $70,000, they would want something closer to Berkeley or someplace like that. I mean, just being reality. So I guess what I'm trying to say in a long way is that what experimentation helps you do is to fill out the picture of what you want to do, and it helps you gain intelligence over things that you don't know.
That's right.
Because of your own biases.
Right. Well, again, the first bit, seeing, right? I'm trying to see as best I can first. So that's all the diagnostic work that we're talking about, right? Then we go down the line, then we run the experiment. And if I could draw this again real quick for you, I think what I need to do is make sure you get this. So if I start up here with diagnostic, then I come over here to self-management. Then I come over here to mobilize. Right? Then I come over here to act experimentally. But it's always a circle. It's not actually a straight line. So as soon as I run that experiment, I go all the way back now to diagnostic and make sure I'm seeing as sharply as possible. Then I go back to what's the new and I can tell you in experimental, your biggest self-management piece once you get through your vulnerabilities and strengths and triggers is going to be how you do time. So I just finished an experiment that took me 3 years to set up. And that was, I had to get this cranky conservative congregation who didn't want women, didn't want Hispanics, and didn't want non-whites out of one of my buildings. They didn't know it was my building. I had to help them know that. It took a lot of time. Those people left and left me a whole mess. I had to go through all the coding thing. I had to get the building all up to snuff. This building is in a bustling Hispanic neighborhood. So now I'm 3 years out of trying to get what I really want, which is I think if I get this building, get it all up to snuff, get the right Hispanic pastor in here, bring the faithful remnant who is not a part of that sort of cranky group back home as a remnant, throw some cash in there, help this vestry, that's our board, to be a real vestry. 3 years later, I can put Ramon Betances in there, who's a guy I sent to English language immersion. See all the steps in place? Yeah. And then just before I went on vacation in July, I installed him as the first ever full-time Hispanic rector of one of our congregations that has both an Anglo component and a Hispanic component. It took me 3 freaking years. Now, I'm the dude who wants to put it in the microwave, push 2 minutes,
and you're done.
and I get my popcorn. But I'm just giving you that as an example. And so for that 3 years, I'm doing this with my staff. I'm doing this with Ramon. I had to invite an Anglo pastor to take Ramon for 3 months, put him in an Anglo immersion experience so he could learn to preach to Anglos and, polish up his English so that he could be the actual bona fide pastor of the Anglos and the Hispanics. So the day we installed him, I saw all these little kids around, and the little kids said to me, "Oh, we're so glad that Father Ramon is here." They knew him from another congregation sometime. He said, "Because we can walk to church from here." I was like, yeah, baby.
That's right.
Which means this is going to be a walking to church congregation. And if the experiment works, the building will be full in a minute. It was full that day. Yes, ma'am.
Did he know what you were preparing?
He was my full-on partner. He was my full-on partner the whole way, but it was 3 years out. But we did not have, in Atlanta, Georgia, with all these Hispanics that we have in Atlanta, we did not have one Anglo rector, pastor, of a congregation that had both Anglos and Africans, Afro-Caribbean people, as well as Hispanics. We always decorate our Anglo congregations with a sort of few Hispanics here and there. So I wanted to flip that dynamic and actually have a bona fide Hispanic-led church that was acting experimentally.
Does he preach in Spanish?
He does now. He preaches in Spanish and English now. And that was part of that 3-year piece of work. He was the right guy. So it starts off with that gift that Robin said about looking at the people. Because I have a number of Hispanic clergy, but he was the guy. Talk, will you do this with me? Will you run this experiment with me? He had to leave a congregation. He was well ensconced and well beloved to do this work. So he took a risk out of his own comfort zone to do this. I got some money in the thing, and my money is a decreasing contribution over the next 3 years. So he gets a clear message from Jump Street that, I'm giving you 10 now, but I'm going to give you 8 next, and I'll give you 6 next. So you're going to have to step it up. That's the experiment I'm running. But we just got that in. But it took me 3 years.
How do you handle people that are impatient?
Oh, you mean beyond myself?
Yeah, well, that's irony, but you've learned the process. And
Yeah.
I've had the experience of, like, and Sewanee.
Yes.
I would try to tell someone, look, this is rural Tennessee. It may take you. This you got to look down the road.
Thank you.
How do you deal with the?
Well, I do
story of
it.
patience?
Everything that we've been talking about the last thing. I mean, it just depends. Have you done your due diligence? Can you speak Can you speak out of your own voice authentically? Can you speak to your heart? From your heart. All those capacities that this thing says. Do you buy enough coffee? Have you kept the detractors close? Have you made them feel listened to? What are their actual concerns? Have you allowed them with their criticisms to strengthen your argument for? You spend a lot of time talking, getting those people, on your side, or at least to give you some data. And then at some point, if, stand in your authority and say, well, we're going to do it. But never cavalier, right? Always with, a group of people beside you, in front of you. And then I'm 8 years in now. I have some trust now. So I'm leveraging that as well. We have enough wins, if you want to use that word. We have enough wins now. I have some losses. You don't have time to hear about those. I have enough wins now for the average person in the diocese, lay or ordained, to say, well, he ain't that damn stupid. Let's give it a shot. So it takes a while. And I think that's the main thing I've had to grow up to. Paul says, grow up in the full stature of Christ. I think one of the things that I personally have had to grow up and realize is that we playing chess, we ain't playing checkers.
Drew had his hand up for a while.
Drew?
Sure. Couple questions related to data, data-driven experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about the data that you're presenting on the front end,
Yeah.
and the data you're making decisions on the back end?
Okay.
Sounds like, I mean, it's different data.
Okay. Yes.
And so, can you just say more about what that's looking like?
Well, the front end data is just a gathering, right? What's the growth like in Atlanta? What counties is it in? The data is, do we have congregations that would partner with me? Have they been making that noise? Do I have competent people who could go and stand in my stead and do some of that work? The basic sort of data. Where would the money come from? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's that. And then as we run the try, then I talk to my financial people. How much money do I have? Because I have to manage my budget, right? Do I have the money to do this, right? And then, you share out that preliminary data. This is what we're thinking to a group like you. This is what I'm thinking, y'all. Can I get some feedback? Feedback from lots of groups, lots of different factions. That's data. And then this is when we think we're going to start. And then, as a courtesy to them and really in partnership to them, at important intervals, usually twice a year, give them updates. This is where we are. This is what we've learned. This is, that sort of thing. And then on the back end, I think one of the things we don't do, I don't know about Baptists or other people, but Episcopalians, they have this self-deprecating, real coy thing going on about wins. Y'all feel like it's the 11th sin to tell somebody you did a good job. I don't have that disease. I think that the body of Christ needs to know when we've done something well. You don't need to spike the ball. You don't need to have an end zone dance. But you do need to let people know that we together accomplished something noteworthy. And that, again, creates momentum. And the truth of the matter is, I don't blow my own horn, but if I put Emily in charge and we've borne fruit, you better believe at annual council, Emily is going to stand up in front of the group and talk about what we've done. I think what helps us also in experiment is if you really genuinely don't have an ego need that you need to be the winner, that you need to be sort of, you need to have a gold bust of your head everywhere, you can actually achieve some stuff. And so when you send the system that message, they want to partner with you increasingly. If you don't need to be the guy or the gal always at the microphone, that helps this. Let's see.
Bishop,
Yes, please.
Can I just offer the way that you do it in science?
Yes.
Right? You experiment, you
Yes.
have the background, data,
Yep.
then you develop a hypothesis.
Yes.
You gather the data based on the hypothesis. You then have the results of what the data is, and you develop a conclusion.
You develop a conclusion, and then you say,
You go back.
exactly. Then after I have the conclusion, we get that group again. We get back on the balcony again and diagnose. And then we'll go back around the circle. So these are not 4 linear deals. It's a circle. And it's over and over and over and again. We're diagnosing, self-managed, blah, blah, blah. Look, I'm going to get ready to go, but on page 180, I like these book people, and I like Manisha's just recent offering there. But here are all I've did and all I've said is right there. They need your authority to leverage what authority you have for you to value learning. My group knows that I'm always, what has he read? He's always what he read, people inviting in. They know that the learning thing is important. Model experimentation. You've got to talk to people about experiments you have run, that you want to run. You've got to encourage that. You've got to redefine failure. I think failure, that word and that spirit is a demon. And it's sucking vitality out of people. So you really got to attack that. You really do. We don't fail, we learn. We learn, right? And if you just use the word, I have found that it greases things because people have just got locked into try and fail, try and fail. What do we say in the church? We already tried that.
Yep, that's right.
But no one ever asked the next question. What did you learn? We tried and failed. Done? Bury it? What did we learn? I think is the question. Friends, if I'm going to honor my commitments, I've got to get on a train. I have so thoroughly enjoyed this. I really have appreciated getting to know you. It looks like I think we're going to be in contact with each other as things go forward. I'm looking forward to that. You have taught me something. You have taught me something, and I'm thankful for that. Every time I do this, the joke is that I'm the one who does the talking, but I walk away with a lot of learning. And so I just want to say thank you very much. I'm grateful to Bill and to Manisha and to Jim and to Meredith for inviting me into this. And I'm grateful to be able to have walked beside you for a little while. My email address is in your packet. If I can be useful along the road, I'm happy to do that. But I asked you to do some things as partners with me at the front end. Here's my parting ask. Sometimes when some big mouth stands up in front of a room for a while and talks, the message could be, just reach out to me for further encouragement, inspiration, and information. But my ask of you is that why don't you talk to each other in the weeks, months ahead? Why don't you engage with some co-learning? This is a thing that we have created in time together, and it doesn't have to end now. You've already sort of begun to walk together. You have a common lexicon here now, some experience together now, and so that is really good stuff, and you could use that going forward. And so while I'm around and I can be around, I hope that you will also reach out to one another. You're in the same city, and it would be really exciting to see y'all sort of be that group that begins to have that conversation and begin to address some of the stuff that you share in common, opportunities as well as problems. So that's my ask.
So can we have a prayer for you?
I sure need one.
And then would you bless us before
Sure.
you go?
I'd be
And
happy to.
Could I?
Bill, I'm
yes,
sorry,
please.
just your ask of us, what I'm wondering is that, because you use social media, Bill does.
I do.
that-
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and
Yeah,
Instagram.
maybe
up there.
maybe an IAPS group,
Facebook group. Good
Facebook
idea.
group, and
Great.
that's a
Good idea.
simple way I find for us to.
That's
converse.
great.
And I see a volunteer. We're gonna give the work back.
All right.
We're gonna give the
Share
work
the
back.
responsibility.
Just work with Pastor.